And we're back like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your freezing again, windy again, Thursday morning here with me in New York. But we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. A kind of under the radar classic from the latter portion of the greatest movie decade ever. That would be the 1990s for those keeping score at home, and we know you are. 26 years ago, the movie starring a very young actor at the time who would go on to significant success and given a lot of indelible performances. He's been a movie star. I would say actor first, movie star second, but he's fantastic in this film, which is based on a true story. A guy by the name of Homer Hickam, who is still with us, he would be in his early 80s now, who was someone who came from I hate to say it this way, a kind of dead-end coal mining town who dreamed of building rockets and having something to do with what would become the space program. The movie is 1999's Rocket Boys. I believe it was released February 19th, 1999, so 26 years old. The star of the film, the lead actor who was on the rise and kind of solidified the fact that he was someone to watch, is Jake Gyllenhaal. Now, I did not see October Sky in theaters. My father had read Homer Hickam's book, probably decades prior. The book was called Rocket Boys. And if you want to get cute, Rocket Boys is an anagram for October Sky. They could have simply called the movie Rocket Boys, but I think the studio was worried that it was going to send the wrong message. I assume it was for marketing purposes, and it ultimately didn't matter because this film, despite great reviews, it's into the 90%, it's at 91, 92% at Rotten Tomatoes, depending on what day you log in. This was a movie that got widespread critical acclaim, made a ton of 10 best lists in a year. 1999 is as stacked of a year as possible. Oh, by the way, if you ask me, is this a better movie than American Beauty? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But that's neither here nor there. Rocket Boys, the book, was in the realm of nonfiction. It was a big seller, and I guess there had been talk of making a movie for quite some time. And it's very difficult when you have biographical type novels, memoirs, translating them to movies, because sometimes you may have a narrative through line for the story, but you ask yourself the question, is anyone going to be interested in seeing this? And that's an imponderable. That's a question that doesn't really have an answer. You're basically, in Hollywood, you're closing your eyes and taking your best guess. This movie is as good as it possibly could be, and it still didn't really resonate with audiences. And I know my dad loved it. He thought it was a great adaptation, not surprisingly, of Homer Hickam's book. And it really got into the kind of sadness, the old school sort of elegiac sadness of being in a town where you've got two choices. Either you become a coal miner, or you better be a really good football player or some other athlete where you might get to ship out and go to college. Or I guess you could join the military and maybe get your head shot off. It's really, going into the movie, I didn't understand that part of it because, whatever, I did some reading, no spoilers, but I'm like, well, I don't understand if he doesn't want to work in a coal mine, don't work in a coal mine. The old 1 + 1 = 2. But unfortunately, in this town, actually called Coalwood, nail meat head in real life, Coalwood, West Virginia, there does not appear to be any other pathway for almost every male in this town. This is what you do. Nobody seems to leave. It is a horrendous, at the time of this movie, Homer Hickam, it would have been probably around 1960 or late 50s. This is what everybody did. Now, there are certain actors who early in their careers sort of attached themselves or became friends with and frequent collaborators with great filmmakers. when David Lynch recently passed, the first actor that not only I thought of, but many people who are movie fans, we thought of Kyle MacLachlan, who first worked with David Lynch in his version of Dune, which is not very good, no offense, but most famously in films like Blue Velvet, and they worked together at Twin Peaks, and then Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, the Twin Peaks Revival, frequent collaborators. Well, the actor who plays Jake Gyllenhaal as Homer Hickam, it's Homer Hickam Jr., actually. The actor who plays Homer Hickam Sr. is Chris Cooper. Chris Cooper seemed to be everywhere in the early 2000s. And he's a very distinctive-looking guy, similar to Roy Scheider, Gene Hackman, Dustin Hoffman, Charles Bronson, Ernest Borgnine. If you go back to the 50s, he looks like a normal person. He does not look like what we assume a movie star would look like. Well, Chris Cooper's David Lynch is the extraordinary American independent filmmaker John Sayles, who I have mentioned on the channel. John Sayles it's not that he's underrated, but let's just say that too many people under 35 don't understand just how brilliant so many of that guy's movies were, are, have been. My favorite film by John Sayles is 8 Men Out. My second favorite film by John Sayles is Lone Star, a 1996 film where Chris Cooper is the star in a movie co-starring a very young and rising Matthew McConaughey. And that film got Chris Cooper more work. Even though it wasn't a success at the box office, people in Hollywood took note. This guy's doing something different up there. And that is how I would describe Chris Cooper as an actor. Speaking of American Beauty, I forgot. He's in... Man, how the hell did I forget that? He plays Colonel Frank Fitz. He's the guy that we think is going to be antagonistic in a different way to the Kevin Spacey character of Lester Burnham. Man, what a great year Chris Cooper has. I can't believe I didn't put that together until now. Humble apologies. But Chris Cooper in this film, I would argue he gives a better performance here than in American Beauty, where he's kind of a stereotype, a bit of a caricature, and then there's a bizarre turn at the end. I didn't buy it. There is a lot of stuff that happens in American Beauty where seeing it in theaters and everyone is bawling their head off around me, I'm like, I'm sorry. This is a good movie, but it's not worthy of all of the plaudits that everybody from Spielberg on down is throwing at it. It's 3 stars out of 4. But Chris Cooper in this film, and I have talked about the concept of a thankless role. And what a thankless role generally implies is it could be a spouse of the main character, usually a wife. It could be a parent of the main character. For example, Joan Allen's character of the mom in The Notebook, that is supposed to be a thankless role. But Joan Allen, being Joan Allen, an incredibly resourceful and talented performer, she makes the character of the mom memorable. Homer Hickam's father in this movie, Homer Hickam Sr., on the page, he would seem to be unlikable. It's a thankless role where a talented actor just shows up, collects a paycheck, and does the best they can with a very limited role. But Chris Cooper has the kind of face where even when he is doing things which appear to be antagonistic towards his son, not in a cruel way, this is not a bad father, but in a non-understanding way, in a, you can't build rockets, you're not going to succeed. You need to accept that you're going to be working in the coal mine with me. There is something to Cooper's performance, what he does with his eyes, what he does with his face, where he's adding shadings that I don't think exist in the screenplay, just because he is such a terrific actor. And not surprisingly, 3 years later, he ended up winning a Best Supporting Actor Oscar, Chris Cooper we're talking about, for a movie that I'm also supposed to really like, written by that fucking brilliant Charlie Kaufman, basically like a Mozart-level screenwriter. I didn't think adaptation was good. It was a great concept. Charlie Kaufman, who had done Being John Malkovich, another movie that I can admit is impossibly brilliant. Like, this guy is so good, he probably should be in a different league, as they used to say about Mariano Rivera. Mariano needs to be in a different league. We have to find a better league for him to pitch in, because it's not fair having to face this guy. Charlie Kaufman is unbelievably brilliant as a writer. And he was hired to do an adaptation of a book by Susan Orlean called The Orchid Thief. And Charlie Kaufman quickly realized he could not adapt the book because there wasn't nearly enough story for more than like a 30-page screenplay. So while he was panicking because he got paid a shit ton of money, he decided to write a screenplay about unsuccessfully adapting the book that he was hired to adapt. That's something that I can't imagine anyone else would have been brilliant enough to even come up with that. So in that movie, Chris Cooper plays the title character of the Orchid Thief. He's a guy who's in the Florida Everglades, and he finds this precious flower and he fucking steals it. The first half of the movie adaptation is incredible, and Cooper is amazing the whole way through. But I believe the movie goes completely off the rails in the second half. It's not even a good movie. I wouldn't even give it more than 2.5 stars. Love Nicolas Cage's performance. He's basically playing Kaufman. And love Chris Cooper's performance. I don't like Meryl Streep in that film. It's not that good. But in this movie, Cooper is strong enough where in a different year where it wasn't such a stacked field, 99 was incredible as far as supporting actors. You had Michael Caine, who ended up winning for Cider House Rules, and Haley Joel Osment, who Michael Caine to this day will say, I really thought, he always called him Hallie, I always thought that Hallie should have won. I don't know why, but Michael Caine, very self-deprecating, always acting as if, no pun intended, well, I didn't really deserve it. But Michael Caine in Cider House Rules was incredible. But yeah, you could have given it to Haley Joel. But Chris Cooper in October Sky, with the way he acts with his eyes and with his body language, it's just beautiful. It's really, really good. And you feel the father-son connection even as it's contentious for huge chunks of the film. And this doesn't seem like it's going to be the kind of movie of the kid proving his parents wrong or his father wrong. But obviously, if we have any idea, we know that it's not going to be a movie about a guy who dreams of working for what would become NASA. He's going to build rockets, and he's going to go to, a college like an MIT that would have engineering programs back in the day. We know it's not going to be about a guy who fails to develop rockets and ends up working at a coal mine. That's not a very exciting story. But what Jake Gyllenhaal does here, he's not asked to do that much. It's not a broad performance. But young Jake, he just had the right look. And he looks like he could be the son of a coal miner and somebody stuck in what appears to be a dead-end life who desires to break free. He wants to do something else, and he's willing to kind of embarrass himself repeatedly. He's going to take his shot. And in the realm of also potentially thankless roles, you have Laura Dern as the unfortunately ill-fated teacher, Miss Riley. I don't know if her name was Riley in real life. I'm not sure of that. But the teacher, the real-life teacher who that character was inspired by, died very young. A lot younger than where Laura was at that time in her life. I guess she was probably, she was still in her 30s. So Laura Dern is somebody who, Blue Velvet, speaking of Kyle MacLachlan, David Lynch, Laura worked with Lynch again in Wild at Heart with Nicolas Cage. Boy, these names just keep repeating. It's unbelievable. But the character of Miss Riley in October Sky, she is the one who continues to refocus and redirect Homer Hickam as he, mild spoiler, he encounters a lot of failure. Because building rockets is not supposed to be easy. And there are a couple of moments in the film where he and or his friends could have been seriously, maybe even fatally injured when one of the rockets, it doesn't work properly. And it's okay if something doesn't work, but if it explodes near you, you could be hit by, you could get powder burns, you could die. And this movie goes into, it's almost the balance of, you have to do this, even if it costs you, I hate to say your life. We're talking about a teenager here, but he is going to continue to try. And Laura's character, and it's a really wonderful performance by her. I've always been a fan. What she does in Blue Velvet is pretty amazing, because she was also just a kid. She was 17, 18, as Jake was only 17 when this film, I believe he was 17 when this film went before the cameras. There's nothing in this movie where I say, this is bullshit, this is bullshit. This feels real. If this were not a book, I would also say, yeah, it's believable. The movie doesn't skip any steps, to use a kind of acting coach sort of a word. It doesn't skip steps. We see in painstaking fashion where Homer is, who his true friends are. Is there a chance for romance? Even with the romance angle, this is still family friendly. They were very careful, and I don't remember the name of the filmmaker. That's something that I definitely should know. I feel like it's a fairly big name, but they keep it on the PG side. And this is absolutely suitable for family viewing. And we see Homer have to, also mild spoiler, at a certain point in the film, he is working as a coal miner. And this is West Virginia, I'm sorry if I didn't mention, is where it's set. And it is conceptually horrifying. And this is something, again, I didn't really get going into the movie. There is a percentage of people who work in coal mines, at least in that era. I don't know how much is changed, because obviously there's still coal, but there is a pretty significant percentage of people who develop iron lung and die simply for doing their jobs. And I don't know if you really want to kind of gauge what's worse, because think about all of the people who worked in often maintenance kind of jobs, whether they were janitors in schools or on ships where they would go through very cold waters and they had asbestos before they knew that asbestos was a killer, because it didn't really show its ugly face immediately. But going to a job, a brutally difficult job, and on top of the fact that you don't get treated that well, and speaking of John Sayles, he made a famous movie called Matewan with Chris Cooper, which dealt with a strike, and I want to say they were coal miners who were looking to unionize. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like that's what that movie was. I only saw parts of that film. That was one of Sayles' most acclaimed movies. But the concept of giving your all to a really difficult job that is probably going to kill you, you won't even make it to 60. It's negative from every angle. And by focusing our attention and our energies on Homer and on Jake with those big eyes and the earnestness of his approach, this is not a grandstanding, this is not a movie star performance. It's similar to what he did a number of years later in The Day After Tomorrow. Not a great movie. You know, The Masters of Disasters, Noah Emmerich and Dean Devlin. But in that film, he gives a similar kind of performance. It is not a movie star performance. It is a very winsome, wholesome character who he has goals, and in as gentle a way as he can, he's not going to quit. He's not going to give up on them. He's just going to keep, in the immortal words of Rocky Balboa, he's going to keep moving forward. It wouldn't be a movie if it was easy, if he just right out of the box builds this incredible rocket, attracts the attention of the top engineers in the country, working for the Air Force flyers probably at the time, the Chuck Yeagers of the day, which eventually became NASA. So I've always been fascinated by space travel and by the idea of how do you build this? How do you achieve these speeds? How do you achieve that? Like, how did anybody come up with the idea of, well, how fast can we build this? I have no idea how any of it works. It's way beyond me. But I'm fascinated by the idea. And so many movies deal with people simply trying to get out of their fucking hometown. Go somewhere else. Start a new life. That's what Homer Hickam, that was his overriding goal. I don't want to end up in a coal mine with a cough by the time I'm 35 that might kill me at 40. He doesn't even have to verbalize it. We see it. We feel it. And we also get the feeling that his father doesn't want him to die in a coal mine any more than he wants to die in a coal mine. But there is that thing, and this is where I mentioned Joan Allen in The Notebook, where you don't want to give your kid false hope, but at the same time, you don't want to extinguish what they're trying to do. You don't want to damp their spirit. You want to be encouraging if you can. And in the movie The Notebook, for example, the Joan Allen character, by her getting to explain why she was so resistant to her daughter going for the Ryan Gosling character of Noah, because she saw too much in the way of parallels with a guy that she used to be with, who was really hot, and she was hot for him, and he ended up not doing that much with his life. Well, in this instance, the not doing that much with his life would be if somebody as intelligent, as clever, as hardworking, industrious, as much an outside-the-box thinker in his teens as Homer Hickam. The tragedy would be him settling to die at age 50 or 55 of iron lung, where he coughed the last 5 years of his life away. That would really be tragic. And again, I hope that safety standards and the ability, and the mother in this movie gets into this, to try to keep the coal dust out of the lungs. They were wearing masks, but weren't really that effective. So I would hope that people doing this nowadays, there is, forget lower mortality rate, lower rate of suffering. The job is hard enough. But this film, although it did not do well at the box office, it's just strange because there are certain movies that you look at from the historical perspective and the numbers make sense, where you have a film that did well at the box office and the audience score was high while critics trashed it. This film, the Rotten Tomatoes score is in the 90s and the audience score is also very high, but people just didn't go to see it. And the fact that it was released in February, it should have been a time of year, a kind of softer release schedule. It should have ignited, no pun intended, it should have ignited at the box office. It just didn't. This is a film that, let's say if you're a fan of Jake Gyllenhaal and are curious about his early work, so I don't really like Donnie Darko. It's another film I can acknowledge it's an ingenious concept and very well acted by, among others, an actor I love, Holmes Osborne, who plays the father. But I don't really, it doesn't make sense that the audience score would be so high. And I remember word of mouth, people at the gym even telling me they saw it. Just didn't do that well. But yeah, if you're looking, what are some great early Jake Gyllenhaal performances? The Good Girl with Jennifer Aniston. He plays a very, very troubled character in that film. It is completely unlike his performance in October Sky. He was showing the range and showing the versatility. At that point in time, he was in his early 20s. He wasn't just, a nice-looking kid, an attractive kid. He was hitting his marks like a pro, even if he was not coming across like the star of the film. He's somebody who was always willing to let his fellow actors or actresses take center stage. There's no camera hoggery or a need to kind of show off during scenes. There is very little that is showy about his performance in this movie. Yeah, his smile gets a workout, but it's a really good performance by him. And I don't know if he was nominated for anything like Young Actors Awards or something. I assume he was nominated because he's too good to not have gotten any acclaim. And it's just in such a non-showy, non-attention-seeking sort of way. He probably figured he'd just, let me hit my marks and the chips will fall where they may. And he did get enormous acclaim, as the film did as a whole, despite not doing that well at the box office. I mean, it probably lost the studio $5 to $10 million, if not more, because it's not cheap with the marketing, and internationally, it grossed like 34 million worldwide. Now, this is not a movie that was made to play overseas. This is a very American story about an American who ended up, a kid who ends up building rockets and going to work for NASA. And he has been a very highly decorated, was a highly decorated NASA engineer for decades. He worked out of Huntsville, Alabama. He didn't work near Cape Canaveral, but he was very involved with the space program for at least 2 decades. I don't know if he was on the ground anywhere when the Apollo 13 in 1970. I have no idea. But Homer Hickam's life it's a really remarkable success story, and this movie sells it and shows it to us and gives us that kind of lump in the throat and maybe even a bit of a tearing up reaction towards the end. It's a really beautiful film, highly recommended, and now 26 years old, released February 19th, 1999. October Sky, 26 years old, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Chris Cooper, and Laura Dern. This has been episode 449 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your freezing Thursday morning here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then,